nothing wrong with your podcast audio feed. Do not attempt to adjust the volume. This is a full-blown flight alert. My name is Ray. Thank you so much for joining me. And once again, this show literally exists whenever James Gunn does something. But not just anything. Something important, something seismic, something potentially incredibly important to those of us fans of not only DC, but also fans of comic book movies in general. He made an official announcement yesterday, and I could have waited until next week. I could have waited until the main show on Tuesday. I could have waited for any of you to send an email in on Flight Chat this weekend, but you know I'm not going to wait. I've literally done every episode of this show except one. One episode of this particular show has been about something non-James Gunn and non-Superman related. One episode. And hilariously enough, that one episode was about a Zack Snyder project, Rebel Moon, the teaser trailer that came out for that movie a couple of years back, right? About a year or so ago. Every other episode of this show literally has been about Superman news. And so's today's episode. How about that? That just tells you how important this is to me, and also important to any of you that are listening, because you know I was going to talk about it. I had my plan already set for what I was going to do for today. I was going to actually get caught up on Star Trek Strange New Worlds. That was literally my plan yesterday. And then James Gunn said, nah, you're not done talking about Superman. The summer of Superman is not over. Summer might be over. And I know that there's still technically a little under 3 weeks of summer left on the calendar, but it's over. Literally at work the other day, somebody brought in donuts and a gallon of apple cider. It's over. Summer is done. Right? Today, went to work, and temperature only got up into the, high 60s? Mid to high 60s, that's right. The high of 65, low of 49. Yeah, it's fall. Fall is here. Walk into Sam's Club, walk into any store. You got pumpkin spice everything. Of course, pumpkin spice everything is invaded for the last month or so. Spiral Halloweens have been up for the last month or so. But now you got all manner of ornamental decorations and ghosts and goblins and all that shit and whatnot. And in some places, they've even started hanging Christmas decorations. We ain't there yet. I know Christmas tries to take over all over the place. But I digress. My point is, James Gunn is a madman of marketing and PR, and so is Peter Safran and the good people at DC Studios. And once again, they have regaled us with a massive announcement that I'm going to talk about here briefly. Famous last words. Briefly, my kind of briefly, if you will, right? On this particular show. But of course, before diving into all of that, I want to remind everybody listening that you can catch this show and all of my other shows at theflightcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts, whether it is Apple Podcasts, whether it is the Flightcast YouTube page, whether it is Spotify, whether it is Pandora. Search the Flightcast, you will find it, or wherever you get your podcasts, and you will find the main show on Tuesdays. You'll find this show or Flight Box whenever I get a chance to get caught up on TV episodes on Thursdays. You'll find random episodes of Flight Review whenever I review movies on Saturdays, or this Saturday, this upcoming weekend, you'll find an episode of Flight Box where I will talk about this week's episode of Peacemaker, which is actually going to drop on HBO Max minutes from now, from the time of me recording this particular episode. I got to go to bed because I got to go work in the morning, so I'm not going to get a chance to see it until tomorrow. But I will talk about it this weekend. And that's another reason for the announcement that I'm talking about today with respect to the timing and whatnot, according to Mr. James Gunn himself. But then there's also Flight Chat, the listener feedback show where you send in your emails, you send in all of your correspondence, and we have a conversation about movies, TV, and other sort of media that you want to talk about. And I imagine a number of you are probably going to send in emails, if you haven't already, about this particular subject today. So we'll definitely get into it, along with any other feedback that you send in on the weekends as well. And that is the schedule, if you will, at theflightcast.com. And of course, also want to take a moment to thank everybody subscribed to patreon.com/theflightcast. Hope that you're enjoying the bonus content. There'll probably be some more tidbits and whatnot that I'll talk about with respect to this news on Friday Flight on Patreon, but I've also been posting episodes of Flight Speed as well, which is kind of my, getting my thoughts out with respect to stuff that's been happening lately in movies, TV, and other sort of media on my way home from work, because I have a rather long commute to and fro my place of employment at the moment. There's also my ranting show, Son Just Don't. Recently, I let Snoop Dogg have it massively and completely uncensored with respect to his nonsense about Lightyear. And I had another rant planned that I was going to talk about scalpers, and I think I'm still going to record that particular rant because scalpers still piss me off. And there's a very specific thing that's been happening lately that I've been noticing that is like really like incensed me, if you will, grinding my gears, if you will. You know what really grinds my gears, which people heard that from Family Guy, but I think it's actually Del Griffith, John Candy's character from Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, which, by the way, that new documentary on John Candy, I just saw a trailer for that. That's supposed to be out in the not-too-distant future, October, I think. But, of course, I digress again. Patreon.com/TheFlightcast, home for plenty of bonus content from my shows. Extra episodes of Flight Box, extra episodes of Flight Speed, and Friday Flight, Flight Review, Flight Report when I finally start reading comics again. All that content is there for your disposal. Hopefully you're enjoying all of it. And as always, I cannot thank you enough for those of you supporting and subscribe to Patreon.com/TheFlightcast. All right, let's get into it. I was at work when this happened, yet again, because a lot of times when these announcements pop off, it's, I'm at work, like it's during a weekday. This was on a Wednesday, right? Like this is hump day. This is in the middle of the week. And my shift was ending. Like I was about to clock out and I was on my way out. I'm talking to coworkers and all of a sudden I get a notification because, of course, on Threads, I have notifications turned on for Mr. James Gunn. And I get a lot of notifications whenever he is active on Threads, especially for these Peacemaker watch parties he's been having. And graciously, he hasn't been really that, heavy into spoilers. And he's been using the spoiler tags, I believe. I'm pretty sure he has. But either way, this notification comes up, and I have to admit that I was in the middle of a conversation with a coworker on it, and when I saw it, I was like, I had the double take. And it wasn't like it was one of those where you had to make certain, and you got to do this more often than not on the internet today, I had to make certain it was real. I had to make certain it was actually him. I'm like, did this come from real James Gunn? Well, I'm getting a notification, so it must come from real James Gunn. Nobody else has tagged me in this, so this has got to be the real deal. This has to be an actual notification from the man himself. And what is it? Well, it was an announcement. It didn't look like an announcement at first, though, because it was a picture of an illustration. And not just any illustration, mind you. An illustration from one Mr. Jim Lee, who I still don't know that I've actually read a book featuring his artwork, but he is absolutely, one of the most heralded DC artists out there. And of course, I think he's still CCO of DC Comics, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, it's his artwork. And this artwork, of course, is Superman and Lex Luthor, but specifically armored Lex Luthor, right? The armored Lex Luthor suit that we have seen so many variations of. We've seen it in the CW. We've seen it animated. We've even seen a modified version of Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor from the DCEU, the Zack Snyder portion of it, if you will, in his own Lex armor, if you will. But this is clearly Jim Lee inspired. But what's more is when you look closer, you look at that Superman suit and you go, oh, that's Corn Sweat's Superman suit. Okay, so what is this? Well, the caption said it all. James Gunn just said, Man of Tomorrow in theaters, and he spelled theaters the old school way, Theatres instead of Teres, but in theaters, July 9th, 2027. Well, holy shit, sir, what do you know? So here's the Superman sequel, or more accurately, the second film in the Superman Saga. The last episode of this show that I did, I talked about him speaking the Superman Saga into existence at the Peacemaker Season 2 premiere, if you will. And now, here we go. This is the script that we knew he was working on. He'd been talking about this for weeks. He said he started writing this once he got everything else, like his last project done. Like he finishes the last project, he immediately starts on the next one. And he had an idea in mind for a sequel already, right? And there's so many beautiful things about this particular announcement. But immediately I just look at that and go, well, there it is. There we go. Man of Tomorrow. Man of Tomorrow. And we've got David Corenswet, and clearly we're going to see the return of Nicholas Hoult as Lex Luthor. And there were others, and I don't know if James Gunn confirmed this himself, but others, the reactions to this have come in. Like I know Isabella Merced, who plays Hawk Girl in Superman, she responded to this, also in Peacemaker as well. She responded to this and said, see you soon. And, so it seems like the gang is all coming back together, if you will. And we'll find out exactly what gang is coming back for this particular film. But, all understanding, if you will, is that production on this is going to start next year because they're going to make a July 9th release date for 2027. So we're talking less than 2 years, people. Less than 2 years, we're getting a Superman sequel. And there is a good amount of fan emotions to unpack with this. First, hell yes, right? Superman second film. Next chapter of the Superman saga. If you want to call it a Superman sequel, cool. But James Gunn is adamant. and making certain that this is not called or considered Superman 2. He does not want this to be Superman 2. And I'm sure that there are plenty of fans out there that are like, well, he's just playing semantics. Like, why is he being such a semantical asshole about it? Why doesn't he just... Because he's a writer and a creative, and I totally understand it. I get it. From his perspective, he's not doing Superman 2. He's not doing a direct sequel to Superman. He's doing a direct sequel, but it's not Superman 2. Because he doesn't want it to be considered like, Iron Man 2 or Thor the Dark World even, right? And even that is a different, it doesn't have a 2 at the end of it, but still, he doesn't want this to be considered just another sequel. He wants this to be another world-building film that involves and centers around Superman. And I have to be honest with you, considering how well he constructed the first one, which, by the way, is still in theaters and is still earning money and is north of $614 million last I checked at the box office, I am pretty confident that he's going to be able to pull it off this time, right? Because he did a great job with it the first time. There are people, I know that there are people out there still critiquing, oh, there's too many characters. It's too much of, there's too big of an ensemble, too many people involved. And yet, I think the vast majority of us could say, well, there were a lot of other characters, but it was still very much a Superman movie. The title was still not false advertising. It still centered around him, most definitely. And it did, right? It seriously did. And so, Man of Tomorrow, now this is a title that has so much connotation to it. I mean, it goes all the way back to the comics because there is a run of comics called Man of Tomorrow in DC Comics lore. And since I'm still a novice for all of these things, and I don't have Scott or Jared or Wally, you or others with me as I'm recording this particular episode, I'm just reading from the wiki that Superman the Man of Tomorrow is a comic book series published by DC Comics that ran for 16 issues from 1995 to 1999, featuring the adventures of Superman. At the time, it says the 4 Superman titles, Action Comics, The Adventures of Superman, Superman, and Superman the Man of Steel, were released weekly with an intertwining story. The Man of Tomorrow was created to fill the extra weekend months with 5 weeks. At about this time, however, it says, DC began its 5th week events, disrupting the schedule of the Man of Tomorrow, which was subsequently canceled with issue number 15. It also says that issue 1 million of the series was a part of the DC 1 million storyline, which was a top vote getter for the Comics Buyer's Guide Fan Award for Favorite Story for 1999. There's a couple of key issues, it says, in this particular run. It says issue 1 features the return of Lex Luthor after being absent from the comics since Action Comics 701 in July of 1994. It says issue 5 of Man of Tomorrow features the marriage of Luthor and Contessa Erica del Portenza. Never heard that name before. And issue 15, the final issue, apparently was the Day of Judgment crossover where Superman has to rescue Lois Lane from Neron and Silver Banshee. Final issue, it says. Even though it says there's 16 issues. Was there an issue 0? I don't know. But either way, Silver Banshee I've heard of. Silver Banshee I've heard of because they did a variant of her, a version of her in the DC CW, technically on Supergirl in the first season that was on CBS. But either way, that's the history of Man of Tomorrow as far as the comic run is concerned. So that's where the title initially comes from. And there is a book, a 1986 American comic book story. I've got the wiki for this too, called Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, which is written by Alan Moore. According to this, with help from longtime Superman editor Julius Schwartz, the story was published in 2 parts, beginning in Superman 423 and ending in Action Comics 583, both published in June of 1986. The story was drawn by longtime artist Curt Swan in one of his final major contributions to the Superman titles, and was inked by George Perez in the issue of Superman and Kurt Schaffenberger in the issue of Action Comics. It was an imaginary story which told the final tale of the Silver Age Superman and his long history, which was being rebooted following the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths before his modern introduction in the John Byrne series, The Man of Steel. Oh yes, John Byrne. I've heard extensively, the praises sung about John Byrne from Scott because he calls himself a Byrne baby. But anyway, that's where the title really comes from as far as the origins. There is a Man of Tomorrow DC animated film, which of course I haven't seen because I have not done my DCAU catch-up either with the continuity universe or the outside films. And I think this is a continuity one. It says it's the 43rd film in the DC Universe animated original movies line, directed by Chris Palmer, written by Tim Sheridan, and it's apparently based on Superman Birthright, written by Mark Waid, Lionel Francis Yu, and Jerry Alanguilin. I hope I pronounced that correctly. But it stars Darren Criss and Zachary Quinto. How about that? And apparently it depicts the early days of Clark Kent's career as the superhero Superman. So, all right, intriguing with respect to, how much does that, how much does Birthright, play an inspiration with respect to what James Gunn is going to do. Birthright, of course, 12-issue comic book limited series published by DC Comics in 2003 and 2004. Originally intended to be a non-canon version of Superman showcasing his origin and updating it for the 21st century, but soon after, it was decided to adopt the series as canon and thus replaced John Byrne's Man of Steel series as Superman's canonical origin story. Project was given to Mark Waid with a request to create an origin story for Superman set in the 21st century, a series that new readers can understand without any previous knowledge of the character's mythos, something that apparently Waid had wanted to do since seeing Superman the movie for the first time. So, and I find this interesting, though. Let me read the wiki a little bit further here, because, again, I'm a novice at this, so bear with me. For those of you who have extra knowledge on this, you can contribute to this on FLITE chat. Absolutely, I welcome it. But it says, by comparison to other origin retellings, Waid wanted some differences. In an attempt to make his character more relatable, his Superman is not infallible. He has problems with his boss. His dry cleaning gets lost, and he longs to connect and be accepted. It also says another difference was having Africa in the origin, which, as Waid has it, helps establish Kal-El/Clark as a citizen of the world and demonstrates what kind of journalist he is. The Infinite Crisis storyline also altered Superman's history so that Birthright and John Byrne's Man of Steel miniseries were removed as his canonical origin. Yes, I read that in the other line. Okay, I find that line interesting because that's one of the things that we talked about with respect to the Superman movie that we just have all now seen, is that it does make Superman more relatable, and it definitely does make him vulnerable, right? And that's been one of the chief complaints from the haters and the trolls is like, he gets his ass kicked too much. He's not really Superman. Yeah, whatever. So they focus more on the man than they did on the super. It's the first time a Superman movie really has done that cinematically in that regard. So that was very refreshing, and it's definitely endeared a whole new generation of fans to Superman through this retelling. So perhaps James Gunn is drawing some more inspiration from Superman Birthright because he's already given us a more vulnerable Superman that, is more relatable in that regard and has been proclaimed as more relatable by many members of the audience that continue to enjoy the film in theaters and digitally. And, in a couple of weeks, many of us will enjoy it in physical form as well when that finally releases. But all right, so that's all of the potential comic origins with respect to the Man of Tomorrow subtitle or the Man of Tomorrow title in this regard. But I really want to talk about the brilliance of this marketing push, this particular announcement from James Gunn. And I have been very praiseworthy. I've praised heavily, rather, the marketing from DC Studios throughout Superman's release, leading up to the release, through the release, and certainly through the official launch of the DCU, if you will. I mean, James Gunn, when has he had a minute off? Like, when has he had some time to himself, for him and his wife to relax? He really hasn't, because he's, with respect to post-production on Superman, and then the press tour started a couple months ago, and, that went on for a number of weeks as they debuted the movie across the world, and, a week or so after, release, he's got to get into the Peacemaker, like Peacemaker Season 2 popping up, just a few weeks ago, right? And he's at the premiere, and he's laying down tidbits, and he's laying the groundwork to set up the DCU as far as hype for the rest of us in that regard, and he's done a phenomenal job. I mean, no rest for the weary in that regard. And here we go. Like, we were at that point, with respect to marketing for the DC, we were at that point where the Superman hype was finally starting to wind down just a bit. It's been in theaters for almost a full month, right? Like July 11th. I mean, now it's August 4th as the time of this episode releasing, me recording it. It's been almost a full month since Superman has been out in theaters. And box office wise, like I said, it has continued to make money, and it is still making into the hundreds of thousands of dollars on a daily basis. In fact, Saturday, August 23rd was the last day that it made over $1 million in one day. That was $1.4 million on the 23rd. That's a week after it released digitally, over a week after it released digitally, if you will, right? And so it's still making money. I said 614. Right now, Box Office Mojo has it listed as over 612 million. Right, so it's still kicking in theaters. 55 days in, and they're gonna leave it in theaters, guys. Warner Brothers and DC Studios are gonna leave this movie in theaters as long as possible to earn as much money out there as possible, because people are still buying tickets. People are still seeing it, right? It's theater numbers have decreased, right? It originally was in 4,135 theaters. Now it's down to 1,824 theaters. Again, this is according to Box Office Mojo. But things were settling down as far as the Superman hype. And we were, we're settling into Peacemaker. We're 2 episodes into Peacemaker right now. We got third episode coming up, like I said, in a matter of minutes after, of me recording this episode. Third episode of Peacemaker is going to drop on HBO Max. And so we're settling into that, and we're talking about that. The conversation around the DCU is centered around that. And then, from that point, we just prepare for the, eventual marketing push that's going to start for Supergirl next year, and then Lanterns, of course, before that, the TV series that will premiere in the spring, if you will, I believe, on HBO and HBO Max, respectively. And then, of course, Clayface. We've already started to see set photos from Clayface, with respect to, the title character and, some Gotham police paraphernalia that people have spotted on set. So the DCU, as far as world building, was starting to branch out. We're starting to settle into, all right, let's build out and flesh out this DCU world and see all these other characters not centered around Superman. And James Gunn says, okay, you know what? We're at this point, but let's go ahead and give them a taste of what to expect next, because we know what the schedule is for us now, right? After Peacemaker Season 2, we're going to be waiting on Lanterns. That's going to be the next DCU project, like I said, spring of 2026. And then after that, we're going to be waiting on Supergirl in June, end of June 2026, June 26th, if I'm not mistaken. And then we'll have Clayface in September later on, right? And from that point on, it's like, okay, what's the next project? What else have we got going? We know they're working on the second season of Creature Commandos. I don't know that they have a release date yet for that. But that's when he decided to give us a release date for this. And to give us the title and to give us the release date, it just reignites the conversation surrounding Superman. So now whatever hype had died down with respect to this first Superman film, reignited. Absolutely reignited. Now the fans are getting their attention and their energy back up with respect to the Superman character. And I said this on TikTok. I am most happy for Superman fans in this, because finally it seems like there is a plan and there is a direction to make Superman front and center, cinematically speaking. And quite frankly, he's deserved this. Superman as a character has deserved this. He is DC's oldest character. Yes, he predates Batman. But it just seems like for the majority of the decades, certainly of our existence on this earth, and even beyond that, Batman has been front and center and has gotten so much attention, has gotten so much praise and so much glory from Warner Brothers. And it is finally time for Superman to get that praise and that glory. And that's great. That's fantastic that Superman is finally coming to fruition and coming to center stage here. And I do want to point out this one thing, because a number of people, when we talk about the DC Studios opening logo for the movies, right? I think a lot of us were thinking along the same vein as, Marvel Studios making, logo title card specific, Marvel Studio logo intros specific to the character of the movie that we were about to watch, which apparently they're doing away with. Apparently they're not going to do that anymore. I think the last one that did it wasn't Thunderbolts. I think it was Captain America Brave New World, because I think it ended with Thunderbolts, and they certainly didn't do it for Fantastic Four First Steps. But I think a lot of us were thinking that, since the first one was Superman, that we saw, attached to Superman, that, we might see character-specific versions for each film and each project. Like we might see one for Peacemaker, but then lo and behold, Superman just turned out to be the same logo for Peacemaker for DC Studios. And so I want to point out this. James Gunn responded to Eli Mythic a couple of days ago on Threads. They said, "Hey, James, have you considered changing the DC title bumper at the beginning of the projects?" Bumper, I think he meant to say. At the beginning of the projects to the character that it's about, rather than Superman every time. And Gunn's response was simply, "He's our MGM Lion." And, for people who don't know, I mean, come on, Metro Goldwyn Mayer, MGM Lion, right? The Metro Goldwyn Mayer logo that pops up at the beginning of MGM films, most notably James Bond films, but anything MGM, has the MGM lion. That lion has been around, decades, generations, seriously. And it is the staple. It is the logo. It is the tradition for MGM Studios and their productions, right? And so now he's saying that Superman is DC Studios' MGM lion. Now, if you're a Superman fan, come on, Wally, you got to feel great. Anybody else that is a massive Superman fan first, this has to be so gratifying for you, for Superman to finally take center stage with respect to an actual plan, and somebody that is in charge of the studio that is actually going to put him front and center and treat him like the MGM Lion. He's the mascot. He's the mascot and he's the image for DC, and it's almost like, in a weird way, perhaps for Superman fans, the world is healing. The world is healing potentially for Superman fans, because he's been declared the MGM Lion, which means he will be the face, front and center of DC Studios for as long as they have that logo bumper in front of every film and every project. So we've already seen it in front of Superman. We've seen it in front of Peacemaker episodes. We're going to see it in front of Supergirl. We're going to see it in front of Lanterns. We're going to see it in front of Clayface. We're going to continue to see Superman front and center as the MGM Lion of DC Studios. That's awesome. That's really awesome, truthfully. And the fact that he uses the real old school version, the original version of the comic character, it's great. It's outstanding. And a level of respect that Superman, it's been long overdue for this character, hasn't it? Right? I can say that. As a Batman fan first, as somebody who got into this being a Batman fan primarily, and I'm still a Batman super fan primarily, I like seeing Superman get this respect. Because Batman has had this respect for decades, and continues to get that respect, right? As people have pointed out, the Batman Part 2 is slated to come out just months after this Man of Tomorrow film in 2027. So, we might be looking at a situation, and I say might, because you never know how release dates change. And I don't think this one's necessarily going to change, but the other one, for the Batman Part 2, could change. I don't want to burst anybody's bubble with respect to that project, which is still Elseworlds. It's still part of the Batman Epic Crime Saga. Because, yes, I know people are already speculating, could there be? No, there couldn't. Okay, no. We're just shut that down. No, that's not happening. As of right now, that is not happening. And hopefully that remains that way. But we could be on the precipice of a year where we get a Superman film and a Batman film released in the same year. That is not Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, right? Like their own separate solo projects. That would be something else. We'll see how that goes down. But either way, to see Superman get this respect finally front and center for DC Studios and the DCU is awesome. And to me, the best part of this announcement by far isn't necessarily the world building, isn't necessarily the confirmation of a Superman sequel, although that is important, right? The second chapter of the Superman saga in the DCU. It's not just that Superman is finally being given the respect properly, that he is subjectively deserved, if you will, with respect to cinematic interpretation, and that there really is a plan here that James Gunn has for the Superman character, and that he really is treating this as seriously as he can, being a fan and a student of the source material, but it's the fact that he continues to involve the comic creators in this. This particular announcement, this wasn't just James Gunn that posted this. James Gunn posted this, and he posted the Jim Lee art with his announcement, Man of Tomorrow. He started the ball rolling. And the Superman official Threads account posted it as well. But he got 3 other guys involved in this. He got Jim Lee involved in this first and foremost, reposting the announcement with his own artwork, right, with Superman and Lex leaning up against each other, like, for the Man of Tomorrow, like, in theaters July 9th, 2027, reposted from James Gunn's original post. But then he also got 2 other pieces of art involved in this from 2 other artists. Mitch Gerrits, who has a Threads account but hasn't been active on it in quite some time, not since February it looks like, but he drew his own artwork, and this is Corin Sweat Superman fighting Nicholas Holt's armored Lex, if you will, and applying a mighty punch, if you will. This is an awesome piece of artwork in Mitch Gerrits style, looking at this art style, I wonder if I've read anything that Mitch Gerrits has drawn. I probably have. I don't know. But either way, that's some education that I certainly need. Let me get my DC Universe Infinite subscription going again. I restarted it a while back and then didn't read it, and I have to renew it because I only went for the monthly. I don't know. At some point I'll do the annual. But no, this artwork is awesome. And then also Jorge Jimenez. Now, this is the one that I really like. And I'm almost certain I've read something that Jorge Jimenez has drawn. And he is also active on Threads. I think he reposted this as well. But this is the both of them in, like, war pose, right? Like, they're both, like, ready to fight someone or something. And Stu pointed this out, when I posted about this, which got a lot of traction. A lot of people, appreciated what I said with respect to this artwork. And this is why I think it's a masterclass. This is DC Studios playing chess with marketing at this point. Because this, Stu was speculating that, the next chapter of the Superman saga, if you will, might involve Superman and Lex reluctantly teaming up together to fight another aggressor. Perhaps Brainiac? So for all of you people that are just, already disappointed that Brainiac isn't in the second chapter of the Superman saga, hold on. That may still happen. Again, James Gunn has already demonstrated his ability to balance an ensemble cast. And not just with Superman, all right? We can go back to the Suicide Squad. We can go back to his Guardians trilogy. Certainly he knows how to balance ensemble cast and still keep it centered on a main character. So Brainiac could very well still be the primary antagonist, and he may be the reason. Brainiac might be the reason that Lex has to join forces, after being released from Belle Reve or whoever, or wherever he's at, with Superman in that regard, right? But this artwork and the reaction to it, I mean, involving the comic creators has always been something that I have praised James Gunn for from the beginning. I still love that video, the behind the scenes video, where he brought out Jerry Ordway and Scott Snyder and so many other comic creators, including, I think, some of the ones listed here, Jim Lee, of course, to the set of Superman, and they introduced them to the cast and crew, showed them the Fortress of Solitude, had them sit on set during productions and whatnot, and just, I remember when they took the pictures from those and posted those last year, and then we saw the videos of it, involving the source material creators, involving the comic creators, respecting the lore. This is something that these studios need to do. And I'll go ahead and say it because others have said it already, and I will agree with them on this. This is something that we haven't seen before from the likes of Kevin Feige and those at Marvel Studios. And it's not to throw shade at them, it's to say, why haven't you done this? Why hasn't it been a case where you do respect everybody other than Stan Lee? Stan Lee you put as a cameo in just about all your films until he passed. May he rest in peace. But as far as the other comic creators, why have you not used the MCU directly as a vehicle to encourage comic sales? That is something that James Gunn is doing right now with DC Studios that is unprecedented, and it shouldn't be unprecedented. This should be something that both DC Studios and Marvel Studios are doing at the same time. But right now, James Gunn is knocking it out of the park. And I knew that I was confident that that was going to be the case. I brought this up before. Go all the way back to when he and Safran were originally introduced as the new heads of DC Studios, and he started giving us homework assignments, if you will, not only for his own slate, but also for the DCEU. Remember the last leg, that final leg of DCEU films that did not perform well at all in 2023? He still gave us comics like, hey, read Flashpoint and these issues before you see The Flash, right? And check this out for... and for his own slate, recommending Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow to read in preparation for that film, giving us All-Star Superman and Superman for All Seasons in preparation to read for the Superman film that just released in that regard, right? Like, and even, truthfully, when he was named director for the Suicide Squad, and he talked about John Ostrander's run on Suicide Squad, which of course I haven't read. But just the fact that he went and pulled out that lore and was like, hey, I know about this, I know about that. That to me was the first sign. I'm like, okay, this dude is a student of the comics. And it's beyond just, his Guardians trilogy and all the work he did at Marvel. He really is a student of the comics. Like, he really is a comic book fan. He really is someone that respects the source material a great deal. He grew up with this stuff. This is arguably the right guy to be in charge of things, right? And so that's why I had more cautious optimism with him being named the co-head and really the creative head of DC Studios. And this is fantastic. When you get the comic creators involved, when you allow them to also carry on the hype and to spread the marketing, right? This benefits everybody. This benefits DC as a whole. It benefits DC Studios. It benefits James Gunn and Peter Safran and their efforts cinematically. It benefits Jim Lee and the comics and all the writers and the artists because they get to showcase their work. They get to talk about how excited they are. It's synergy. Synergy the likes of which we, again, have not seen up to this point between a major comic book movie studio and the source material, right? This is synergy between DC Studios and DC Comics respectively, and it's great. It's awesome, and he's got Tom King and all these other comic creators involved in the production process and the writing for like the animated shows and some of the live action stuff, like Lanterns and like the Mr. Miracle stuff and whatnot. Like all of that, like this type of synergy is something that I think is necessary, sorely needed, and long overdue for both of these studios. And the fact that James Gunn is doing this, it's arguably the best thing that he's doing, truthfully, because this opens the door for the longtime comic book fans. This opens the door to make new comic book fans, right? So imagine like how many people, and I don't know how we gauge numbers on this. And I know I see reports here and there about how, sales for DC Comics have risen, with the proliferation of Superman, the release and the proliferation of the DCU. But you just wonder how many brand new fans of Superman in the DCU have picked up Superman comics since then. How many of them have read Superman runs? How many of them, followed the homework suggestion with respect to reading Superman for All Seasons or All-Star Superman? How many have done that? And, whether it's digitally or whether it's physically, going to a local comic shop or whatnot. Like, that's what it's supposed to be about, right? Because all of these cinematic adaptations are Elseworlds. They're all variations of the source material, but to respect and honor the source material, to have this synergetic creation, or the synergetic connection, if you will, is phenomenal. And that's why I say it's marketing chess, not just because of the timing, not just because of the anticipation and getting the fans energized for another Superman film again, this far out, this early out, but also to connect it to the source material and the comic creators and have them help with marketing efforts, right? To get Jim Lee to post and repost, to get Mitch Gerrits and Jorge Jimenez and Scott Snyder and many others to post and submit their own artwork, right? It helps everyone. And this is clearly something that we're going to see continue throughout the DCU's existence, throughout DC Studios' existence. And Gunn openly talks about these characters and those characters, right? They lean into it heavily, and he doesn't shy away from it. He embraces it. And this is really something that, I mean it, not to call out Marvel Studios or the MCU, they should be doing this. Marvel Studios should absolutely be doing this, right? If there's anything that they can take, this is a note that they should be taking. For years, we've heard about how DC has needed to take notes from Marvel. Here's some major notes that Marvel Studios should be taking from DC Studios. And I'm not saying that, oh, well, they're in such a downward spiral, they need to do something. No, I'm not saying it because of that. I'm saying because that can only help everyone, right? Marvel Comics are still out there. Marvel Comics are still being sold. Marvel Comics are still being read, just as DC Comics are. And James Gunn and Peter Safran decided to create this synergy between the studio and the source material. Marvel Studios should absolutely do the same, right? And I realize that what Marvel does is a different approach, and that they have altered comic runs to match the MCU. And I know that fans are in a different place with respect to that as far as that goes. But I feel like honoring those writers and getting them involved, honoring those artists and getting them involved is what both of these studios should be doing. And right now, DC Studios is running a masterclass on it, and it's phenomenal. And arguably, it is the strongest part of this marketing, in my opinion, in my subjective opinion. And there's a ton of strong stuff about this marketing. I mean, this placement, the timing, the hype that it builds among the fans, and the promise, right? We know what's in production, right? Like, this isn't like announcing a massive slate ahead of time and, delivering on barely any of it like the DCEU did, right? Supergirl is in the can and is in post-production. Lanterns has been filming, and that, if it isn't done already, that'll be in post-production. We know that's releasing in spring of 2026. Clayface just started filming, right? We know those 3 productions are happening. We're in the middle of season 2 of Peacemaker. We are about to be 3 episodes in, right? In fact, I've got to close out my threads because people are going to start posting about it, and I don't want any spoilers until I watch it tomorrow. But this is how you build hype for your studio. This is how you build hype for your shared universe, is you deliver, right? And you present an organized plan, and you look like you know what the hell you're doing, right? They aren't just throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks. No, he's got a plan. He's got a structure. He has an idea of what he wants to do, and he's made it very clear what it is he wants to do. He wants scripts finished first. He doesn't want to do the assembly line process, right? So he waits for those to get done, and then as soon as those are done, right, that's when they begin the process and get it going, get a director, start doing all the pre-production work, casting and everything, and that's when they really get it going. And the marketing machine is just going to continue. It's just going to be a continuous thing, right? We had all that early marketing going into Superman, right? And since Superman, a week after Superman came out, the marketing for Supergirl immediately began because there was that Lookout poster that came out. And then a few weeks after that, Peacemaker, right? So now we're into this marketing plan, and we'll see what he's got planned because, more than likely, we're going to see Superman again before Man of Tomorrow. We are. And you know what? I think it's all but certain that it's going to happen in Peacemaker Season 2. And my speculation for that, if you haven't heard me mention this before, is there was a picture that Danielle Brooks, who plays Leota Adebayo in Peacemaker, there is a picture that she posted to her Instagram account. And I saw this from Ben Everts over at Real Anarchy First, because he was speculating that Superman was going to be in Peacemaker Season 2. And I said, oh, okay, that's possible. And then he shows me this picture of Danielle Brooks that she took with David Corenswet. And it's not just that she took a picture with David Corenswet. She took a picture with David Corenswet while he was in his Superman suit. And now I realize, as I've said before, that Peacemaker Season 2 and Superman were shooting at the same time. But are you really telling me that she just decided to visit the Superman set? No, he was there. He was on the Peacemaker Season 2. He's in Peacemaker Season 2. Technically, you could say he already is. Because the controversial, not really, but the controversial, the retcon that's not a retcon. It's just how the events unfolded in season 1 of Peacemaker in the DCU form instead of the DCEU form. It's the Justice Gang instead of the Justice League that show up at the end of Project Butterfly, which means that Corn Sweat Superman is there already. We just see the silhouette, but he's there, and it makes sense because it's the Justice Gang, it's the DCU, not the DCEU. So technically, he's already there, but I'm pretty sure we're going to see him. Yeah, and whether it happens in the next 3 episodes that the critics and whatnot were allowed to see, or if it happens in those last 3 episodes that apparently have a lot of twists and turns that James Gunn decided to keep close to the chest because he didn't want anything spoiled prematurely. Whatever episodes it's in, or he's in, like, we're going to see him. I am fairly confident that we are going to see David Corn Sweat Superman in the flesh, effectively, with lines and whatnot, playing a role at some point in Peacemaker Season 2. I think that is going to happen. So that will be our next appearance of Superman. And again, Superman front and center. Superman getting the respect and the attention and the importance that he deserves in the DC cinematic pantheon. In this particular shared universe, it's fantastic. It's awesome. I have no complaints. I have none. As a diehard Batman fan, I have no, and again, us Batman fans have nothing to complain about. So whatever happens to the Batman Epic Crime Saga, whether you feel it is fair or not, this is more fair. Superman getting his time to shine is far more fair at this point. Batman's had so many decades to shine. Batman has had so much content. I've said that before. I got a shelf of Batman that I can refer to at any time that I want. And Superman fans don't have that much. They're getting it now. They're getting it now front and center, and they're building more of a Superman fan base now, and it's being reignited, and DC's oldest hero is finally getting the respect that he deserves, subjectively speaking. So yeah, this is fantastic news. This is nothing but a good, an announcement, and I'm sure people have nitpicked it to death. I've already seen some critiques and some complaints here and there, whatever. It's trolls, rage baiters, people that just don't know how to be happy in life, whatever, but it is what it is. Man of Tomorrow, July 9th, 2027. New announcement from James Gunn. Official. So, yeah. Can't wait for that. There's other stuff that he's been responding to, and has been talking about with respect to that development and other developments in the DCU. But, yeah, here we go. Here we go. The DCU is here and rolling. Any haters and any trolls that still want to tell you how much of a flop Superman was, yeah, bullshit. Absolutely ridiculous. That is the biggest amount of copium that you could possibly take in that regard. I mean, so much coping is being done by those Snyder cultists, right? And it's one of those things where it's like, being a Zack Snyder fan, it's like, okay, I don't want to be like this. I don't want to be snarky towards anybody else that actually has an appreciation for Zack Snyder's work. And for the actual Zack Snyder fans, I don't have to be because they're not assholes. But these cultists who keep posting all these stupid-ass memes or this one thing. Now, this is a dude. I'll point this out real quick. Zaki Hassan posted this yesterday, and it was a screenshot because he's still on Twitter. He's clearly got to still be on Twitter. I am not on Twitter/X or whatever, but he screenshot this nonsense. Now, this is from an account on Twitter. This dude goes by the name of Baramos Gonis, whatever. But this is a dude that I used to be mutuals with. Back in the early days in the DCEU and all that, when we were all like Snyder fans joining hand in hand in the militant, Snyder cultist stuff was just starting to form, if you will, right? We were all mutuals because we all had a mutual respect for Man of Steel, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, and we all wanted to see Zack Snyder's Justice League, right? But this dude turned toxic, and he's one of the most toxic cultists out there, right, over on X. James Gunn, of course, still has an X account, and he posted, the Man of Tomorrow announcement there. And this moron, Baramos Gonis, apparently screenshotted or quoted it and said, "So sunk cost fallacy it is. WB never change." And Zaki, of course, screenshot it and said, "At this point, the only sunk cost is how much these folks have invested in the idea that the movie flopped." And in parentheses, he said, "It didn't." And he's right, it did not flop. But here's the deal. For people who don't know what sunk cost fallacy is, I'll give you the Oxford Language's definition of it. It's the phenomenon whereby a person is reluctant to abandon a strategy or course of action because they have invested heavily in it, even when it is clear that abandonment would be more beneficial. And the sentence of example is, the sunk cost fallacy creeps into a lot of major financial decisions. So essentially, this toxic asshole Baramos is claiming that Man of Tomorrow is a subject of sunk cost fallacy because they are reluctant to abandon the DCU strategy, even though it is clear that abandonment would be more beneficial. Well, the only the only people that the abandonment of the DCU would be beneficial to are Snyder cultists. That's it. Like the entire rest of Earth, it would not be beneficial to abandon the DCU. And we're already seeing why, and again, these trolls and these morons, these are the ones that don't look at, they're so blinded by their narratives. And they just want to fight with people. That's all it is. They just want to fight with people. And they just want to feel like they're right. They're egotistical sons of bitches. And they're not good people whatsoever. No, there is no logistical reason to abandon the DCU or any connections to Superman. The Superman Saga is most certainly what you should do at this point. Because in this climate, in this box office climate, as has been detailed in several pieces from THR and Deadline and Variety and other places, right? These are box office experts. These are people in the industry that have been talking about, at first they were saying that we weren't going to get to pre-pandemic box office numbers until 2030, and now they're not certain that they're going to get back to them at all based on things that have happened in the last few weeks, right? That was the piece that I did that I talked about on Tuesday's episode of FLITEcast, right? These are the people that are saying, hey, in this day and age, Superman is most certainly not a flop. Superman is most certainly a success. And as I've said, we need to evolve our discussion with respect to box office and talk about all the other ways that these movies make money for these studios, because it is antiquated as hell to believe that it is solely from box office, solely from theatrical performance, right? So when people like Baramos want to point out that there's no way that Superman is going to match Man of Steel's numbers, and they do the adjusted for inflation shit, they never adjust the budget for inflation and talk about how Man of Steel would have been a $300 to $400 million film. They also foolishly and kind of psychotically believe that Superman, or rather Man of Steel, would have made over $1 billion in today's economy. Yeah, okay, with whose money, right? The way gas prices and the economy are working in the United States alone, you think anybody's got enough money to be spending that much on Man of Steel? You're out to lunch. You're beyond out to lunch. You need to seek help. You need to go find a doctor. You need to go find some serious mental health help at this point, these people. So, yeah, this sunk cost fallacy nonsense, which, again, it's only from the cultists. And it's only from the people that just have absolute delusion with respect to the success that Superman and the DCU are enjoying right now, right here and there, right? Like a sequel like this, I mean, first of all, the head of Warner Brothers, the studio head, one more time, David Zaslav, don't like him, not a good person. He's made several errors, in my opinion. But one of the best decisions he made was creating DC Studios. When he took a victory lap in that opening weekend for Superman and cemented the presence of the DCU going forward and basically gave James Gunn and Peter Safran the green light to continue. He gave them the freedom to make an announcement like this. And James Gunn has done nothing but build this into a hype machine. And that's what the DCU is building now, a hype machine, right? It started in earnest with a soft open with Creature Commandos, really built to a crescendo and made the grand opening of Superman what it was, and it's still going strong 55 days or so into its theatrical run. And now you got Peacemaker on HBO Max that people are tuning in for, and now that's continuing the hype, and we're rolling that in. We're going to roll that in to Lanterns in the spring, and we're going to roll that into Supergirl in the summer, and we're going to roll that into Clayface in the beginning of fall, right? Like that's how you get a hype train going. And now we've got a second Superman film to focus on, a second Superman film to build our hype on. You don't do that if it's clear that abandonment would be more beneficial. You don't do that. Absolutely not. And it's clear that abandonment would be a horrible decision, right? So basically, these Snyder cultists want them to do the exact same thing that Warner Brothers did very badly in a knee-jerk fashion to Zack Snyder. And it's crazy. Again, Harvey Dent, take him to church. You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. They're living it right now. They want what they want the pain. They want their pain that they won't let go of. They want their misery that they're clutching to like a binky to spread to everyone else. And none of us are having it because we don't need to be miserable. We have a living, breathing DC cinematic universe in the flesh that is happening before our eyes. It has just gotten started, and now it's building a concrete plan with a concrete studio with autonomy that is moving forward and building hype and creating new fans and doing just a bang-up job of marketing, just a very, very impressive job of marketing, to the point where I literally said earlier in this episode that after years of people saying that DC should take notes from Marvel Studios, now I'm saying Marvel Studios should take notes from DC. And who's going to disagree with me? Who out there is legitimately going to disagree with me on that, or anyone here listening going to disagree with me on that. I don't know. Maybe you do, but I present the evidence. I present, especially the stuff with the comic creators. That's what we're talking about here. So no, there's no like actual logistical sunk cost fallacy here, unless you are a diehard Snyder cultist that just wants the world to be as miserable and pathetic as you are. That's all. The only sunk cost fallacy that actually exists in that regard. DC Studios and Warner Brothers are doing exactly what they should be doing to sustain a successful comic book shared cinematic universe and television universe as they are building now, and building it in a way that is fresh, that is different, that is revitalized and reborn. You know, something that is not MCU 2.0, something that is different, something that is not evocative of past DC projects, but is you know, respects the history while also moving forward into a brand new future. And yeah, it's a phenomenal job so far, and you know, the hype and the optimism, you know, is only growing at this point, and hopefully it continues on. You know, we'll get through this next season of Peacemaker and see where it leaves us, and see how we react to the twists and the turns and the building and the fleshing out of the DCU as we continue forward into the other projects, which now includes Man of Tomorrow, in theaters July 9th, 2027, as the second chapter of the Superman Saga. And thus concludes the 9th chapter or episode of Flight Alert. Thank you so much for listening to this show. Thank you so much for supporting the Flightcast. For those of you that have any thoughts with respect to all of this, and I know many of you do because we're all DC fans, Superman fans, etc. or whatnot, you know where to find me on Threads and on Instagram at the Flightcast, on Blue Sky at Flightcast. You can also comment on the posting for this particular episode at the Flightcast YouTube channel, youtube.com/theflightcast. There's also the Flightcast Facebook page, and of course I can be reached by email at ray@theflightcast.com. All right, take care. Stay safe out there. Have a great rest of the week and into the weekend, and I will see you all next time. Take it easy.